Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the economic concept of market failure, where free markets have broken down and there's either too much or too little of a particular good or service that's being produced. And as a result, allocation efficiency is not being achieved. The example we're going to walk through today is market failure due to externalities, where the full costs or benefits of an activity are external to, or in other words, not realized by the individual who's performing it. So to illustrate, we'll take the example of Jack. And Jack enjoys baking muffins. So there's Jack and his world-class muffin. Next, we'll draw a simple graph that shows value on the vertical axis denoted by the dollar sign and quantity on the horizontal axis denoted by the letter Q. In the origin, in the lower left-hand corner, that reflects zero value and zero quantity. Now, Jack generates value from baking these muffins, from the process of baking which he enjoys, the smells, the tastes, and the ability to share with friends and family. So for the first batch, we can mark that on the quantity axis. There's going to be a significant amount of value generated, which we'll mark on the value axis. And this will provide us with a point where the value is generated by that first batch. Jack proceeds to bake his second batch of muffins, which we'll show by a second dash on the quantity axis, and it generates positive value. However, it stops short of the value that the first batch produced. When everything was new and it was the first taste out of the oven for the friends and the families and the smells and the tastes. So the second batch will have a benefit that is slightly lower than the first. We can denote that by the point, the intersection of the second quantity of muffins and the value it generates. Now we can continue to draw the relationship here and call this the marginal benefit for Jack of producing more batches of muffins. For every additional batch he creates, the marginal benefit, or that additional value he's getting, is less. There's also a cost for every batch of muffins that Jack bakes, including the cost of the supplies, along with the time that Jack invests to bake it. We can denote that on the value axis as a cost of X. And for simplicity, we'll assume that the cost of the first batch is the same as the cost of the second and the third and the fourth, etc. So there's a constant cost for every batch. We can reflect that as a horizontal line on our graph and call this the marginal cost of baking muffins for Jack. In fact, Jack will continue to bake batches of muffins until his marginal benefit, reflected by the line MBJ, is equal to his marginal cost as reflected by the line MCJ. And this happens right here where those two lines intersect, and we'll call that quantity 1. And that's equilibrium in terms of Jack's costs equaling his benefits, which determines the amount he will supply or produce. To extend this example one step further, let's also consider that Jack has neighbors. And these neighbors enjoy the smell of the baking muffins. And we can quantify the level of their enjoyment on the value axis. And we'll call that value Y. For simplicity, once again, we'll assume that the benefit the neighbors receive from the first batch equals the benefit they receive from the third batch, from the fifth batch, and so on, such that we can reflect that in a horizontal line and label that the marginal benefits received by the neighbors. Now, taking this one step further, we can add the marginal benefits that are received by the neighbors from each batch to the initial marginal benefit that Jack received himself. As an example, if we take the first batch of muffins and we add the amount of symboled by Y of benefit to what Jack had initially received on his marginal benefit line, we get this new point at the very top. Similarly, for the second batch, there is an additional value on top of what Jack receives by the neighbors of Y. Now, this continues, and we can denote this by a blue line that intersects these points. And we'll call this the marginal benefit for society for each of these batches of muffins that are produced. Once again, as long as the marginal benefit of the next batch of muffins is greater than its marginal costs, there is value to go ahead and produce it. And if we take a look at that initial equilibrium where Jack had stopped producing muffins, the Q1, and we trace it up to the marginal benefit for society, we see that there is still positive value in proceeding to create another batch of muffins. And the new equilibrium is where the blue line intersects the marginal costs for Jack, the red line, reflected by Q2. In this example, we see that there are too few muffins being produced if we were to consider the total value that society receives from Jack producing them. And this is called a market failure. And that failure is caused by an externality. In this case, where Jack is not aware or compensated for the additional value that he's generating for the neighbors when he bakes these muffins. One way to account for this would be to provide a subsidy for Jack of amount Y for each batch of muffins that he produces. And in that event, his marginal benefit line would equal that of society's. We can show that as the white line, moving that white line up by providing Jack with a subsidy of amount Y for each batch of muffins that are produced. Again, we draw another Y here. All along this line, for every batch of muffins he produces, he would receive a subsidy or a payment from the government or some central party that would incent him to continue to produce muffins until this point of Q2, where resources are allocated optimally from a society's perspective. This type of market failure is also seen in examples such as immunization and education, where the individuals receiving the immunizations or pursuing the education are not aware nor fully compensated for the full societal benefit that is accrued by them doing so. And in those cases, the government or central group can provide a subsidy or an incentive for those groups to pursue that activity. And this will in turn lead to a greater number of people pursuing those activities than otherwise would. So in this video, we've covered the concept of a market failure, and specifically due to an externality where the individual was not fully aware of the benefits of the activity they were pursuing, as well as a possible solution, which is in this case a subsidy that could be provided to the individual. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it useful, and look forward to our upcoming courses.